Isaac Parker, a hero to a few, but a devil to many. A butcher hiding behind a black robe. A man both feared and hailed for over 2 decades. And when he said, "Let justice be done," it usually ended with a rope swinging in the wind. But what made him so different from the rest? Did he not fear the powerful men above him? This is the story of the judge who sent more people to the gallows than any judge in American history. This is the Forgotten Felonies. Before the gallows, before the name the hanging judge echoed through the West, he was just Isaac. Isaac Charles Parker was born in 1838 in a small, quiet town called Barnesville, Ohio. It was a peaceful Quaker place, the kind of town where you'd hear more birds than bullets. But even in a town like that, young Isaac was hungry for something bigger. By the time he was 17, he was already knee-deep in law books. And by 21, he had passed the bar, officially a lawyer, sharp as a knife and ready for more. He wasn't born into power. There was no silver spoon, no family name to carry him forward. Everything he got was something he earned. He rose through Missouri politics during the chaos of the Civil War. And not quietly, either. Isaac was anti-slavery, proudly pro-union, and fiercely loyal to law and order. But he didn't just want to write the rules. He wanted to be the one who made sure they were followed, and that meant going to the one place where the law barely had a voice. The edge of Indian Territory, a land wild and untamed, a place where outlaws didn't just hide, they ruled, where sheriffs were rare and justice was more of an idea than a reality. That's where Isaac saw his purpose, not in city courts or polished offices, but in the raw, rough places where justice had to be dragged in by force. And he would be the man to bring it, whether the West liked it or not. By 1875, the American frontier wasn't just wild, it was practically untouchable. Law didn't walk there, it ran the other way. And that's when President Ulysses S. Grant made a decision that would echo through history. He appointed Isaac Parker as the federal judge for the Western District of Arkansas. Now, that might sound like a regular job in a dusty courtroom, but this was no ordinary court. Isaac was handed authority over 74,000 square miles of pure, untamed chaos. This wasn't just Arkansas anymore. This was the edge of civilization, the borderland of Indian Territory. What we now call Oklahoma was, back then, a place where the law barely existed. Outlaws ran free, hiding among tribal lands. Murders were often answered with silence. And justice, that was something people read about in newspapers, not something they experienced. There were no jails, no police departments, and no sheriffs on patrol. Just Judge Isaac Parker, a handful of brave U.S. Marshals, and one massive wooden gallows. This was the setting where Isaac would build his legend. Between 1875 and 1896, he presided over an unbelievable 13,000 cases. He handed down 160 death sentences, and under his orders, 79 men were hanged. One by one, they were led to the gallows that loomed just outside his courthouse in Fort Smith. For some, it was justice. For others, it was cold-blooded revenge with a legal stamp. Isaac never wanted to be known as the hanging judge. That label haunted him. The law back then didn't give judges much of a choice. If someone was found guilty of crimes like RRP or murder, federal law required the death penalty. No exceptions and no second chances. Isaac didn't get to decide who lived and who died. The law did. He was just the man reading it out loud. In private, Isaac called the death penalty barbaric. He thought it was outdated, brutal, even cruel. He wasn't some monster getting joy out of hangings. He actually wrote to Congress, begging them to change the law, to give judges more flexibility, to let mercy exist alongside justice. But Washington didn't listen. They refused to give him that power, and so, day after day, trial after trial, Isaac sat on his bench, delivering the only sentence the law allowed: hang. That word, so final, so cold, became his signature. But here's what made Isaac different. He didn't run from the responsibility. He didn't pass the buck or hide behind excuses. Isaac took the weight of it all on his shoulders. He believed if the law had to be harsh, someone honest had to carry it out. Better him than someone who didn't care. And so, for 21 years, he ruled the frontier with a gavel in one hand and the rope always waiting in the shadows. Isaac Parker wasn't out for blood. He was out for order, even if it came at the cost of his reputation, his peace, and eventually his health. They eventually called him the hanging judge because he was the only one willing to do what no one else could: bring justice to a place that had none. But not everyone who stood before Judge Isaac Parker walked away. In fact, most didn't. The men brought before his bench weren't pickpockets or horse thieves. They were killers, predators, the kind of people whose names made others check their locks at night. There was Crawford Goldsby, better known as Cherokee Bill, an outlaw with a short fuse and a fast gun. By the time he turned 21, he had already killed 7 men. He smiled during his trial and even joked on the gallows. Then there was John Childers, who didn't just kill. He slaughtered an entire family. Cold, calculated, no remorse. And let's not forget the Rufus Buck Gang, a group of teenage outlaws, multiracial and merciless. They rapped, they murdered, they robbed their way across Indian territory, leaving a trail of nightmares behind them. These weren't gray area cases. These weren't misunderstood kids. These were monsters, and Judge Isaac Parker gave them what the law demanded: death. But not every case was wrapped in guilt and tied with a bow. Some men came to Isaac's court not as predators, but as poor souls with no money, no education, and no defense. They didn't have lawyers who fought for them. They barely understood what was happening. And in Isaac's courtroom, justice moved fast. Trials sometimes lasted less than a day. One morning, you'd be arrested, and by sundown, your fate was sealed. And appeals? Almost impossible. Once Isaac handed down the sentence, the path to escape was razor thin. And here's where things get complicated. Because while Parker always claimed he was just following the law, the crowds kept growing. Public executions became events. People came from nearby towns to watch men hang. Some brought lunch. Kids climbed trees for a better view. It became a show. And the man at the center of it all? Judge Isaac Parker. He insisted he had no choice. He said that he's the law's slave, not the master. But the whispers were getting louder. Was he really just enforcing justice? Or had justice turned into a machine, one that cared more about results than fairness? Critics started poking holes in his courtroom style. Was he too fast, too harsh, too comfortable sending men to die? They pointed out how some of the convicted never had a real chance. They were poor. They were illiterate. Some didn't even speak English. And yet, they were marched to the gallows just the same. To Isaac, the law was a sacred duty. To his critics, it was a weapon in the hands of a man who couldn't see the bigger picture. But here's the part no one could deny. He brought order. Before Isaac, Indian Territory was the Wild West's backyard, lawless and deadly. By the time he was done, the most feared criminals knew if you crossed into his court, you weren't walking back out. So, was Isaac Parker a hero? A necessary evil? Or was he something else entirely? A man so committed to law and order that he stopped seeing the people behind the crimes. In Isaac's world, justice didn't hesitate. It didn't stall. It came quickly, and it often came with a noose. But by the early 1890s, something changed. The cheers grew quieter, the crowds grew uneasy, and the man once feared across the frontier began to lose his grip. Public sentiment was changing. People started asking harder questions. Was all this death really justice? Or had Isaac's court become a machine, efficient, merciless, and outdated? Then came the final blow. Congress stripped Isaac's court of its jurisdiction over Indian Territory. Just like that, 74,000 square miles of authority vanished overnight. The Wild West had a new sheriff, and it wasn't Isaac anymore. His power crumbled. His courtroom, once the busiest and most brutal in the land, became a shadow of what it was. But Isaac didn't go down without a fight. He wrote desperate letters to Washington. He gave interviews to the press, defending his court, his mission, and his name. He begged Congress to restore his authority, to let him finish what he'd started. But Washington didn't listen. Not this time. The world was moving on. And Isaac, he was being left behind. In 1896, at the age of 58, Isaac Parker died in his home, sick, nearly blind, worn out by years of battle, both in the courtroom and in his own mind. And when he died, no one took his place. The court was dissolved. Just like that, the era of the hanging judge was over. But the story? That didn't end with his last breath. Maybe he was right. Maybe he was just a man doing his job the only way the system allowed. Or maybe, somewhere along the way, justice got lost in the spectacle. Today, the Fort Smith gallows still stand, weathered and silent, no longer in use, but impossible to forget. They're part of a historic site now. Tourists walk past the same wooden frame where dozens of men once took their final steps. But behind the wood and rust is a reminder that the line between justice and punishment isn't always clear, that even a man in black robes can be haunted by the weight of his choices. But what do you think? Was Isaac Parker a sinner or a preacher in your eyes? Let us know in the comments. Missed our episode on the black banker who outsmarted Wall Street? Go watch it now. This is Forgotten Felonies, where justice always leaves a mark.